Look at almost any animal, and its life is shaped mostly by the body it was born with. A tiger carries its strength in muscle and teeth. A bird carries its future in wings. A whale carries its world inside the ocean. But humans became something stranger. We changed our food with fire, changed our hands with tools, changed our memory with language, changed our children with teaching, and changed the land itself, until forests, rivers, animals, and even night began to bend around us. Yet this was not simply progress. Every change gave us something, and quietly took something away. So what happened to the human animal, and why did we change more deeply than any other creature on Earth? Why humans changed more than any other animal? Before humans changed the world around them, they began as animals with bodies that did not seem prepared to rule very much at all. That is the first quiet difficulty inside the story. If we only look at the body, and nothing else, the human animal appears strangely exposed. The skin is thin, the teeth are modest, the hands are useful, but they do not tear like claws. The legs can walk for a long time, but they cannot outrun many hunters over a short distance. A human child remains helpless for years, needing food, warmth, protection, and teaching long after many young animals can already move through the world with more confidence. Even an adult human, standing alone in an open landscape without tools, clothing, fire, or shelter, would not look like the obvious winner of nature's long contest. This matters because the question is not simply why humans became clever. The deeper question is why a creature with so many visible limits became the creature that changed more than any other animal. Most animals meet the world with a body already shaped for a particular way of surviving. A grazing animal carries its life in hooves, digestion, herd movement, and alertness. A cat carries its future in silence, muscle, balance, teeth, and sudden speed. A bird carries its escape in wings. These are not simple lives, and they are not inferior lives. They are highly refined answers to particular problems, but they are also answers written deeply into the body. The animal survives because its body already contains much of the solution. Humans were different in a way that is easy to miss. Our bodies were not empty of adaptations. We could walk upright. We had hands capable of precise movement. We had eyes that worked well with depth and distance. We had social attention, memory, and a brain able to learn from others. But these gifts did not make us complete in the same direct way that a claw, a shell, a thick hide, or a powerful jaw completes another animal's life. They made us open. They made us dependent on learning. They made us unfinished in a useful but dangerous way. And that unfinished quality may be one of the earliest doors into the human story. A body that is not locked tightly into one answer can suffer more when conditions change, but it can also search for another answer. When the forest shifts, when the climate cools, when familiar foods become scarce, when danger comes from a direction no instinct can fully predict, a fixed solution can become a trap. The human body did not solve all of this by becoming stronger in the simplest sense. It solved some of it by needing others, by watching closely, by copying, by remembering, by carrying habits across time. A stone held in the hand could change what the hand was able to do. A group sleeping near one another could change what a single body could survive. A remembered path to water could become as important as sharp teeth. A child taught slowly over many years could inherit not only a body, but a way of living. This is where the beginning of human change becomes clearer. It did not start with cities, writing, farming, or machines. It began much earlier, in the long period when human ancestors had to live with bodies that were capable, but not enough by themselves. The origin point is not a single dramatic moment. It is a long pressure, repeated across landscapes and generations. A fragile body meeting a difficult world and finding that survival could be moved into behavior, memory, tools, and shared life. That is why the first step in understanding human change is not to imagine humans as masters of nature. It is almost the opposite. We change so much because we began with a body that needed more than itself. The human animal had to borrow strength from stone, warmth from fire, safety from the group, and knowledge from those who came before. In that borrowing, something unusual started to happen. The line between body and world became less clear. A hand with a tool was no longer just a hand. A child inside a teaching group was no longer only one young animal learning alone. A memory carried by several people could outlast fear, hunger, and even death. From this quiet beginning, the human path did not move in a straight line, and it did not become simple progress. But it did begin to move differently from the path of most other animals, because our survival was slowly being built outside the body as much as inside it. A body with limits does not automatically become a changing animal. Many creatures are vulnerable, and most of them do not turn vulnerability into tools, firelight, teaching, and shared memory. What made the human path unusual was not weakness alone. It was the way weakness met attention. Early humans and their ancestors had to notice the world carefully, because the body could not answer every danger by force. A track in soft ground, a fruiting tree remembered from another season, the behavior of animals near water, the sound of movement beyond grass, the gesture of an older hand showing a younger hand how to strike stone. None of these small moments looks grand from far away, yet together they point toward a deep change. Survival began to depend less on one body reacting alone, and more on a chain of watching, copying, remembering, and teaching. This did not make humans separate from nature. It tied them more closely to signs in the land, to weather, to other animals, and to one another. Hunger still began in the body, cold still touched the skin, fear still rose in the chest when night came. But around that body, another layer of survival slowly formed, made from memory and shared attention. This is one reason humans change so much. A young tiger does not need to be taught how to become a tiger in the same open-ended way. Its body already carries a very specific answer to the world. A human child enters life with fewer ready answers. That long helplessness is costly. It asks for protection, food sharing, patience, and a group that can keep the young alive while they learn. But it also creates a rare opening. A child can be shaped by the place, by older people, by tools, by habits, by dangers, and by repeated examples. The young do not simply grow, they absorb a way of living. They learn what can be eaten, what should be avoided, how to move with others, how to read faces, how to hold an object, how to wait, how to follow, and how to remember. We do not need to imagine perfect prehistoric wisdom to see this. We only need to accept a simple biological fact. Human life depends on learning for a long time. And wherever learning is necessary, change can move faster than bones. A useful habit can pass from one person to another. A safer path can be remembered. A better way of cutting, carrying, digging, or sharing can remain after the first person who used it is gone. Not every habit survived. Knowledge could be lost when groups scattered, environments changed, or people died. The human path was never a smooth climb upward, but the possibility was there. The body was not enough, so the group became part of the body's answer. A single person might be weak in the dark, but several people listening together changed what the dark meant. A hand might be soft compared with a claw, but a hand guided by another hand could learn to shape stone. A memory inside one skull could fade, but a memory repeated by others could last longer. Number. Near the beginning of the human story, this may be one of the most important shifts. Survival was no longer held only in muscle, teeth, or instinct. It began to live between people. It lived in gestures, habits, remembered places, shared warnings, and slow teaching. The human animal still walked, hungered, slept, and feared like an animal. Yet its way of surviving had begun to spread beyond one body into the lives of others, and that made change easier to carry forward. The first great change in the human story was not a city, a farm, a wall, or a written sign. It was quieter than that. It was the moment when survival began to depend on something outside the body, but still close enough to feel like part of life. A stone edge in the hand, a remembered place where water might remain after dry weather, a group that did not scatter at the first sign of fear, a child who watched long enough to repeat what an older person had done. These things did not make early humans powerful in the simple way a lion is powerful. They made them flexible, and flexibility is a strange kind of strength. It does not always look impressive at first. It can look like uncertainty, slowness, dependence, even weakness. But over time, it allows a creature to face more than one world. Many animals are beautifully fitted to one way of living. That fit can be so exact that the body and the environment seem to match like two halves of the same shape. But when the environment changes, that same exact fit can become dangerous. A body made for one narrow answer may struggle when the question changes. Human ancestors were not free from this danger. They still needed food, shelter, warmth, safety, and each other. They still lived under climate, hunger, injury, and chance. Yet their survival did not rest only on fixed bodily equipment. It could shift through behavior. It could shift through learning. It could shift through objects picked up, altered, carried, lost, and made again. This is why the beginning of human change should not be imagined as sudden greatness. It was more like a slow widening of possible answers. If one food became harder to find, another could be tested. If one place became less safe, movement could open another path. If the hand alone could not cut, a sharp stone could extend it. If one person forgot, another might remember. None of this means early humans controlled nature. They were still small inside vast landscapes. They were still exposed to weather, predators, disease, accident, and the hard limits of the body. But something unusual had begun. The human way of surviving was becoming less locked inside flesh alone. This matters for the larger question of why humans changed more than any other animal. Once survival can be partly carried in habits, tools, and shared memory, change no longer waits only for anatomy. It can happen in the space between generations. A technique can be copied before bones change. A route can be followed before feet evolve differently. A shelter can soften cold before skin grows fur. A group can protect a child before that child is able to protect itself. This creates a new kind of pressure. The body is still important, but the world around the body starts to become part of the answer. The origin of human change begins here, in the meeting between an unfinished animal and a difficult landscape. Not unfinished because it lacked value, but unfinished because its life required completion through others. A human alone was one thing. A human with a group, a tool, a learned habit, and a remembered landscape was something else. From that difference, the path ahead slowly opened. Later, fire would change food and night. Language would change memory. Migration would carry people into cold, heat, coast, mountain, and desert. Farming and cities would change the ground beneath human life. But those later changes were not separate from the beginning. They grew from the same pattern. The human body meeting its limits, then building a wider body around itself through attention, cooperation, and memory. So the first answer to the title is not that humans were simply better animals. It is that humans became animals whose survival could keep moving outward. Outward into stone, outward into shelter, outward into teaching, outward into the group. And once survival began to move outward, the human animal could keep changing long after its body alone had reached the edge of what it could do. For most animals, the border of the body is also the border of power. A claw can only reach as far as the limb that carries it. A tooth can only bite where the jaw can close. A horn, a shell, a wing, a thick hide, a poisonous skin. Each one belongs to the animal in a direct and physical way. These are old solutions shaped over long periods of time. They are not simple. They are not crude. They are the deep equipment of life. But they also mean that survival is often tied to what the body already is. The human animal began to move along a different path when important parts of survival started to sit outside the skin. A stone in the hand was not flesh, but it could change what flesh could do. A branch shaped or chosen for use was not a bone, but it could lengthen reach. A scraped hide was not fur growing from the body, but it could hold warmth around the body. A place chosen again and again for shelter was not a shell, but it could protect soft skin from wind and cold. This is not a small change. It means that the human answer to the world did not have to wait only for the slow reshaping of muscles, teeth, or skin. The answer could be picked up, carried, shared, improved, forgotten, and found again. Near the beginning of the human story, this was one of the quiet turns that made later change possible. The hand became important not because it was the strongest hand in nature, but because it could meet an object and turn that object into a temporary extension of the body. The early stone tools we find in the archaeological record are not dramatic in the way a monument is dramatic. They are often small, rough, and easy to overlook, yet they show something enormous in a plain form. They show that an animal had begun to use the world as a set of possible body parts. A sharp edge could stand where sharp teeth were not enough. A hard stone could strike where a bare fist would fail. A carried object could make a weak animal less dependent on what it was born with. This does not mean every early tool was carefully planned in the modern sense. It does not mean early humans understood the future consequences of what they were doing. It only means that behavior, object, and body began to work together. That was already enough to open a different road. When survival moves outside the body, change becomes more flexible. If a tool breaks, another can be made. If one material is missing, another may be tried. If one method does not work, a slightly different movement can be copied from someone else. The body still matters. The fingers must grip. The eyes must guide. The brain must notice. The group must allow learning to continue. But the solution is no longer sealed inside anatomy. This is why the question of human change cannot be answered by comparing humans only to stronger animals. Strength was not the only issue. The deeper issue was where strength could be stored. For many animals, strength is stored in muscle, speed, armor, teeth, venom, or instinct. For humans, more and more of it came to be stored in things around them. In stones shaped by blows. In fire kept alive. In shelters used again. In paths remembered. In gestures repeated until a child could do what an older hand had done. At the origin of this pattern, the human body was still fragile, still hungry, still limited by weather and injury. But it had begun to gather pieces of the outside world into its own survival. That is one reason humans changed more than any other animal. They did not only adapt to environments. Slowly and unevenly, they began to carry small environments with them. A tool is easy to misunderstand because it looks like an object. A stone flake, a wooden point, a digging stick, a piece of hide, a cord made from plant fiber. Each one seems separate from the animal holding it. But in human life, objects did not stay separate for long. They entered movement. They entered memory. They entered the way the body understood what it could reach, cut, carry, break, protect, and repair. A sharp edge did not replace the hand. It changed the hand's meaning. A hand without an edge could grasp, pull, press, and hold. A hand with an edge could open skin, scrape wood, separate meat, shape another tool, and leave marks that outlasted the moment. This is one of the quiet reasons humans changed so deeply. The body did not need to become a clawed body in order to cut. It could remain soft, sensitive, and precise, while borrowing hardness from stone. That borrowing allowed change to happen in a different place, not only inside bones, but in the relationship between body and material. The first human ancestors who used tools did not step outside nature. They became more deeply involved with it. They had to know which stones fractured cleanly, which branches held weight, which places offered shelter, which animal traces meant danger, which plants could be gathered, and which materials broke too easily. This was not knowledge floating in the air. It was practical, physical, repeated knowledge. It lived in the wrist, the eye, the shoulder, the fingers, and the memory of watching someone else. A tool, then, was not just a thing. It was a learned movement attached to a thing. Without the movement, the stone was only a stone. Without the stone, the movement had less power. Together, they formed a new kind of survival. This helps explain why the human path could keep changing. When an animal depends mainly on a body part, that body part changes slowly across generations. Teeth, claws, wings, and shells are shaped by long biological time. But when an animal depends partly on an object, the pace can shift. A different stone can be chosen tomorrow. A better grip can be copied by a child. A broken tool can become a lesson. A useful shape can be repeated, until it becomes normal in the group. This does not mean change was fast in the way modern life is fast. For most of human history, change was slow, fragile, and uneven. But even slow cultural change is different from waiting for a new tooth or a new limb. It can move through attention. It can move through imitation. It can move through need. At the beginning of the human story, this made the world around the body strangely important. The landscape was not only a background, it was a storehouse of possible extensions. Stone could become edge, wood could become reach, skin could become covering, fire, later, could become warmth, light, and altered food. A repeated campsite could become a remembered pocket of safety. The human animal was still dependent on the same basic things as every other animal: energy, rest, protection, reproduction, and survival through uncertain seasons. But the way those needs were met began to pass through objects and habits. That is why archaeology matters so much for this question. Bones tell us what the body was like. Tools tell us that the body had begun to work with the world in a new way. A scattered stone flake may not look emotional or grand, yet it shows that a living hand once used matter to cross a limit the hand could not cross alone. Over generations, those small crossings accumulated. They did not make humans separate from animals. They made humans animals whose abilities were partly stored outside the skin. And once ability could be stored outside the skin, human change had more places to happen. Once survival began to move outside the body, the human animal entered a different kind of relationship with time. A claw belongs to the animal that grows it. When that animal dies, the claw's use dies with it. But a tool can remain on the ground after the hand is gone. A path can remain in memory after one person stops walking it. A shelter place can be used again by people who did not first discover it. This difference is quiet, but it changes the whole story. Human change became able to leave traces outside the body, and those traces could wait for the next generation. A stone edge, a broken flake, a pattern of use near water or shelter. These are not just remains. They are signs that survival had started to gather a history. The body still had to carry hunger, tiredness, fear, and cold, but the body was no longer starting from nothing each time. It could begin from what others had already learned. This is one reason humans changed more than any other animal. Not because every generation became wiser, and not because history moved upward in a smooth line, but because useful behavior could sometimes survive longer than a single life. A young person could grow into a world already marked by older choices. There might be a place where stones were found. There might be a method of holding one stone against another. There might be a familiar way of cutting, scraping, carrying, or sharing. None of this required written language. It required bodies close enough to watch, hands patient enough to repeat, and groups stable enough for learning to matter. Near the origin of the human path, that was already a powerful arrangement. It meant that a small discovery did not always vanish. When the first discoverer vanished, it could become habit. Habit could become tradition. Tradition could become the ground under a child's first understanding of the world. In this way, tools did more than extend the body. They changed the meaning of inheritance. Other animals inherit bodies shaped by evolution. Humans inherited bodies too, of course, but increasingly they also inherited ways of doing things. A child did not only receive bones, hands, eyes, and hunger. A child received a world of examples. How to sit near a fire, later in the human story. How to hold a cutting edge. How to notice when others were afraid. How to follow a group through a familiar landscape. How to treat an object not as dead matter, but as something that could help the body cross a limit. This is where the border between biology and culture begins to soften. The human body made learning possible. But learning then changed what the body could survive. The hand made tools possible, but tools changed what hands were used for. Social life made teaching possible, but teaching changed how long childhood mattered. Step by step, human survival became a loop. The body shaped behavior, and behavior reshaped the conditions around the body. That loop is one of the deep engines of human change. It is also why the human story cannot be told as simple victory. Depending on tools and shared knowledge made humans flexible, but it also made them dependent. A person who learns to survive with a group can suffer deeply when the group breaks. A body protected by shelter may be more exposed without it. A life carried by memory can be wounded when memory is lost. The same outward movement that made humans powerful also made them vulnerable in new ways. Still, the pattern had begun. The human animal was no longer only adapting by becoming a different body, it was adapting by building a different relationship with the world. Stone, wood, hide, place, gesture, memory, and group life became parts of survival. From that beginning, later changes could grow. Fire, cooking, language, migration, farming, cities, and the long history of humans altering the earth that first shaped them. The first step was smaller and older than any civilization. It was an animal reaching beyond its skin and discovering, slowly, that the outside world could become part of what it was. Fire did not make humans different in one simple moment. It was not a door that opened once, with everything changed on the other side. The evidence for early fire use is complex, and scholars do not treat every trace in the same way. Some burned materials can come from natural fires, some ancient signs are clearer than others. So the safest way to speak about fire is not to turn it into a single dramatic invention, but to see it as a long relationship that became more stable over time. That relationship mattered because fire changed the space around the human body. Before fire, night belonged mostly to darkness, cold, and the senses of other animals. The human body could still rest, gather close, listen, and wait, but it had few ways to change what darkness meant. With fire, even a small circle of light could alter the feeling of a place. It could warm exposed skin. It could make certain animals keep distance. It could gather people into a shared edge between light and dark. It could turn a campsite into something more than a place where bodies happen to stop. This is important for the larger question of why humans changed more than any other animal. Fire was not part of the body, yet it began to behave like an added power around the body. It was not a claw, but it protected. It was not fur, but it warmed. It was not daylight, but it pushed back a little of the night. Near the origin of the human story, this kind of change was extraordinary because it did not require the human body to grow thicker skin or sharper teeth before the environment could feel different. The change happened around the body, and then the body lived differently inside that changed space. We should be careful not to imagine early humans sitting beside fire with modern thoughts or full control over what it meant. Fire is dangerous. It burns, spreads, consumes, and dies if it is not fed. A group that used it had to live with both help and risk. But that is exactly what makes fire so powerful in the human story. It was not only a useful thing, it was a force that had to be watched. It required attention, timing, fuel, and a shared sense of care. In that way, fire fit the older human pattern. The human animal was already becoming a creature whose survival depended on things outside the skin. Tools had extended the hand. Shared memory had extended experience. Fire extended the space of safety itself. It made the area near people different from the area farther away. A dark landscape did not disappear, but a small human-made center could exist inside it. That center may have changed how bodies rested, how people gathered, how food was prepared, and how time after sunset was lived. Not all of this can be measured with certainty from ancient traces, and it should not be exaggerated. Still, the broad idea is accepted. The long control and use of fire became one of the major differences between humans and other animals. Other animals may benefit from natural fires in limited ways, but they do not build their lives around keeping flame, feeding it, moving with it, and using it to reshape food and shelter. Humans did. And because of that, fire became more than heat. It became a new kind of environment made by behavior. A fragile body could sit near it and survive cold more easily. A group could gather around it and share a protected center. Raw materials could be altered by it. Food, later and importantly, could be changed by it. In the slow beginning of human change, fire shows the same pattern again. The body meets a limit, then builds an answer outside itself. But fire was different from stone. A stone tool stays still until the hand moves it. Fire moves, eats, brightens, fades, and threatens. To live with it was to live with a piece of controlled danger. And once humans began to make room for that danger, the world around them was no longer only something endured. It was something that could be quietly transformed. Fire changed food in a way that reached deeper than taste. Before cooking became a regular part of human life, food had to meet the body more directly. Tough fibers, raw roots, hard seeds, sinew, skin, and dense plant matter All asked for work from teeth, jaws, hands, and digestion. The body had to spend time and effort breaking the world down. Cooking did not remove that effort completely, and it did not make life easy, but it changed the first stage of the struggle. Heat can soften, it can make some foods easier to chew, it can make certain nutrients more accessible, it can reduce some dangers in food, though not every danger. It can turn a piece of animal or plant matter into something the mouth and stomach meet differently. This matters because human change was never only about the outside world. It was also about the quiet negotiation between the outside world and the body. A sharp stone changed what the hand could do. Fire changed what food could become before it entered the body. That is a different kind of power. The human animal was no longer simply accepting food as the landscape offered it. Slowly, unevenly, and across long stretches of time, humans began to alter food before the body had to finish the work. This does not mean we should pretend to know every detail of early meals. Ancient diets varied greatly by place, season, climate, and available plants and animals. There was no single prehistoric menu. But the broader point is safe. Cooking became one of the major ways humans changed their relationship with energy. Food is not just comfort. Food is survival made physical. It becomes movement, warmth, repair, growth, childhood, memory, and the strength to wake again. When fire entered food, it entered all of those things indirectly. A cooked meal could mean less chewing for some foods. It could mean a different texture. It could mean food shared in a more settled place near warmth and light. It could mean that the body's daily struggle with raw material was softened before it began. Near the origin of the human story, this was one more example of survival moving outward. The jaw did not have to become the jaw of a great predator to handle every difficult food. The hand did not have to tear like a claw. The stomach did not have to face every substance unchanged. Fire stood between the body and the world, changing the world first. This may be one reason cooking has become such an important idea in thinking about human evolution, not because it explains everything by itself, and not because every question is settled, but because it shows how deeply behavior can feed back into biology. When a species regularly changes its food before eating it, the environment of the body changes too. The mouth, the gut, the energy budget, the time spent chewing, the way food is gathered and shared, all of these can become part of a long pattern. We should be careful here. It is too simple to say fire alone made humans human. No single cause can carry that much weight. Human change came from hands, walking, social life, learning, climate pressures, tools, language, and many other forces working together over time. But fire gave those forces a new center. Around fire, food could be prepared. Around prepared food, sharing could matter in new ways. Around sharing, children could watch, wait, learn, and belong. A meal near flame was not just eating. It was body, material, heat, time, and group life meeting in one place. This is why fire belongs so close to the heart of the question. Humans changed more than other animals, partly because they did not only adapt to what food demanded, they changed what food demanded from them. Fire also changed time. That may sound less obvious than warmth or cooked food, but it may have been just as important. For most animals, daylight sets a hard boundary around many forms of action. When light fades, movement becomes more dangerous, vision weakens, and the world belongs more strongly to creatures made for darkness. Humans were not built like night hunters. Our eyes can adjust, but they are not the eyes of an owl or a cat. Our bodies can move in the dark, but not with the same ease as animals whose senses are tuned for it. Fire did not erase that weakness. It did not turn humans into creatures of the night, but it made a small island of changed time. Near flame, the day could continue a little longer. Hands could still work. Faces could still be seen. Food could still be shared. Children could remain close to older bodies. A group could sit inside a circle where darkness had been pushed back, not completely, but enough to matter. This was not a simple victory overnight. The dark remained outside, cold remained outside, danger remained outside. Yet the human animal now had a center that did not belong entirely to sunrise and sunset. That matters for the larger story because humans changed more than other animals, partly by changing the conditions under which human bodies lived. A body that once had to stop when darkness came could now gather, wait, prepare, and remain alert in a different way. The origin of this change is not a scene we can fully recover. Archaeology can show burned remains, hearths, altered materials, and patterns of use, but it cannot give us the full feeling of those nights. We should not pretend to hear ancient conversations or know exactly what people thought beside flame, but we can understand the practical shift. Fire made a place more visible. It made warmth gather in one area. It made people tend something together. It required fuel. It required care. It could fail if ignored and become dangerous if mishandled. In that sense, fire trained attention as much as it served the body. A group using fire had to live with a force that was useful only when watched. This fits the deeper pattern that began earlier in the human story. Humans were already learning to survive through objects, memory, and cooperation. Fire made that pattern stronger because it could not be treated as a dead tool. A stone edge could be dropped and picked up later. Fire had to be kept, fed, carried, remade, or found again. It pulled people into repeated behavior. It created habits around fuel, place, food, and rest. Over a long time, those habits helped shape a different kind of animal life, not because fire alone made humans human, but because it placed the human body inside a small, managed environment. Around that environment, other changes could gather. Tools could be repaired, food could be prepared, bodies could warm, the young could watch the older, the group could remain close after dark. Even silence near a fire would not be the same as silence scattered across a cold landscape. It would be silence held in a shared circle. This is why fire belongs near the center of human change. It turned the outside world into something partly negotiable. Cold could be softened, food could be altered, darkness could be interrupted, danger could be held at a little distance. None of these changes removed human fragility. In some ways, they made dependence deeper. A creature that learns to live with fire may suffer more without it. A body warmed by flame still needs flame to be there. But this is the strange bargain running through the whole human story. Each outward extension gave humans new power and a new need. Fire shows this clearly. It made the human animal less confined by raw conditions, while tying it more tightly to learned behavior. By living near controlled danger, humans did not leave nature behind. They began making small pockets of nature behave differently, and then they learned to live inside those pockets. The human brain is often described as if it were only a larger machine for solving problems. That is partly true, but it is too narrow. A brain does not live alone inside a silent body. It grows inside care, danger, hunger, faces, voices, touch, waiting, and repeated examples. The human brain became powerful not simply because it could think, but because it could be shaped by other people for a long time. This is one of the deepest differences in the human story. A human child is born unfinished in a very practical sense. The body is fragile. The mind is open. The young need feeding, carrying, warmth, protection, and years of learning. That long dependence can look like a weakness, and in the beginning of life it truly is. A young human cannot simply enter the landscape and survive by instinct alone, but this weakness creates space for something unusual. The child can absorb a way of living before fully understanding it. It can watch hands, faces, movement, fear, patience, and warning. It can learn not only from pain or hunger, but from the experience of others. Near the origin of the human path, this mattered because survival was already spreading beyond one body. Tools, fire, remembered places, and group habits all needed minds that could learn slowly and carefully. A brain that grows inside a teaching world becomes different from a brain that only reacts to the moment. It can carry signs of the past. It can connect one event to another. It can notice that a certain place was safe before, that a certain sound may mean danger, that an older person's gesture is worth following, that a tool is not just an object but a way of doing something. None of this requires us to imagine ancient people thinking like modern people. It only requires us to recognize that human learning is deeply social. The eyes of a child are not only looking at the landscape, they are looking at other people looking at the landscape. That second layer changes everything. If one person notices danger, others can respond. If one person knows how to prepare food, others can watch. If one person has walked a difficult path, younger bodies can follow before they know the full reason. This is where the brain and the group become hard to separate. The brain makes shared life possible, but shared life also becomes the environment that shapes the brain. A child raised among tools learns a world with tools. A child raised near fire learns a world where flame must be respected. A child raised among people who remember roots, seasons, animals, and materials grows inside a network of attention larger than its own skull. This helps explain why humans change so much. Intelligence was not stored only in one head, it was spread across relationships. A single mind could fail, forget, or die. But a group could hold more than one memory at once. The human brain, then, was not just an organ of private thought. It was an organ built for shared survival. It read faces. It followed gaze. It learned from rhythm and repetition. It waited for approval, warning, correction, and care. These ordinary social abilities may seem quiet beside the drama of fire or migration, but they are part of the foundation beneath them. Without long learning, a tool is only an object. Without shared attention, fire is only danger. Without memory passing between people, a hard-won habit disappears. The human animal changed more than others partly because its brain needed other humans in order to become fully useful. That need was costly, but it allowed each generation to begin with more than bare instinct. The young inherited a body from biology, but they also entered a living world of examples. In that slow entrance, the human brain became one of the places where the past could prepare the future. A brain that depends on other people does not only collect information, it learns what to pay attention to. That may be one of the quietest forms of human change. The world is too large for any animal to notice everything. A body must choose. Even when it does not know, it is choosing. It must attend to food, danger, shelter, movement, other bodies, and signs that matter for survival. In many animals, much of this attention is guided strongly by inherited patterns. In humans, inherited patterns still matter, but they are joined by something more flexible. A child learns the local world through the attention of others. If older people stop near a plant, the child may learn that the plant matters. If they avoid a place, the child may learn caution. If they handle a stone in a certain way, the child sees not just the stone but the meaning the group has given to it. This is a deep shift because the human brain is not only adapting to the physical environment, it is adapting to a social environment that already contains memory. Near the beginning of the human story, this made each group a kind of living classroom, though not in any formal sense. No walls were needed. No written signs were needed. The teaching could be quiet, repeated, and practical. A child watched how adults moved when the weather changed, how they reacted to tracks, how they divided attention between food and danger, how they treated fire, how they carried tools, how they waited before acting. Much of this learning may have happened without explanation. It lived in imitation, correction, habit, and closeness. That is why the long human childhood matters so much. It gave the brain time to be shaped by a world larger than instinct. It allowed a young person to absorb local answers before facing the full force of the landscape alone. This kind of learning did not make humans perfect. Often, it could pass down mistakes as well as useful habits. It could make a group attached to a familiar way even when conditions changed. But it also meant that humans were not starting from the same point each generation. The origin of human change lies partly in this layered beginning. A newborn receives a biological body, but soon begins to receive a social world. That world contains old roots, tool habits, food knowledge, warnings, gestures, and ways of staying close. The brain grows into these patterns. It does not merely store them like objects on a shelf. It uses them to decide what matters. Over time, this gives human groups a special kind of adaptability. They can live in different places not because the human body instantly becomes suited to each place, but because attention can be trained differently in each place. In one landscape, people may need to know the movement of herd animals. In another, the rhythm of tides. In another, the signs of dry seasons, edible roots, cold nights, or safe crossings. The body remains human, but the mind is tuned by place and people. This is another reason humans changed more than other animals. The same basic body could carry many different ways of living because the brain could be organized by learning. A person born into one environment could grow into the habits of that environment so deeply that they felt natural. Yet those habits were not simply in the bones. They were taught, watched, remembered, and repeated. This made human survival both powerful and fragile. Powerful because learned attention could open many worlds. Fragile because if the chain of teaching broke, a great deal could vanish. A tool without the knowledge of how to make it is only a shape. A landscape without memory can become strange. A child without guidance meets danger with fewer answers. The human brain needed other people because human survival had become too wide to fit inside one body. It had spread into knowledge, and knowledge needed carriers. The human brain did not become important only because it could solve problems inside one lifetime. It became important because one lifetime could prepare the next. That is a very different kind of change. In many animals, the young inherit a body well matched to a certain way of living, and much of what they need is carried by instinct, growth, and the ordinary pressures of their species. Humans inherited bodies too, but they also inherited a world already shaped by older hands and older attention. A child could be born into a place where certain stones were known, certain foods were remembered, certain paths were safer, certain dangers had names or signals, and certain habits were repeated often enough to feel almost natural. This meant the brain was not only facing the present, it was being filled by traces of the past. Near the origin of the human story, this gave human groups a strange advantage. Experience no longer had to disappear completely when one body died. Some part of it could remain in the group, not perfectly, not forever, not without loss, but enough to matter. A way of making a tool could survive in repeated motion. A warning could survive in gesture or sound. A memory of water, shelter, animals, or seasons could survive in the route a group chose again and again. This is where the human brain begins to look less like a private organ and more like one part of a wider system. The skull held memory, but the group helped keep memory alive. The child learned from adults, but adults also depended on children to carry habits forward. The living depended on the dead, not through ghosts or myths, but through the practical remains of what had been learned before. This is one of the reasons humans changed more deeply than other animals. Change could accumulate outside the slow pace of anatomy. A better habit, if it survived, could slightly alter the starting point for the next generation. A group did not need to wait for new bones before it could live differently. It could change how it gathered, how it prepared food, how it used fire, how it moved through a landscape, how it protected the young, or how it shared work. These changes were fragile because they needed memory, but when they held, they made each generation less alone. The brain that needed other people became the brain that could carry other people's lives forward. This does not mean early humans were always becoming more advanced in a clean line. Human knowledge can shrink. It can break when groups are isolated, when environments change, when elders die, when children do not learn, or when a familiar landscape no longer gives the same answers. The human path has always included forgetting as well as remembering, but even that shows how unusual the arrangement was. Humans became dependent not only on food and shelter, but on continuity. A body could be healthy and still suffer if the chain of knowledge broke. A hand could be strong and still be helpless without knowing what to make. A group could stand in a rich landscape and still fail if it no longer knew how to read it. The beginning of human change is hidden inside this dependence. The brain opened the door, but the group kept the door from closing. Over time, this made human life increasingly layered. Biology gave the basic body. Childhood gave time to learn. Social life gave examples. Memory gave depth. Tools and fire gave the world new forms. Each layer made the next one more possible. So when we ask why humans changed more than any other animal, the answer cannot be only that humans had large brains. A large brain alone, cut off from teaching, care, and shared memory, would not have carried the same force. The deeper answer is that human brains became linked across lives. They allowed one generation to leave more than bones behind. They left movements, habits, warnings, skills, and ways of seeing. From that quiet inheritance, the human animal began to change not only by becoming different in body, but by beginning each life inside a world already touched by those who came before. Language changed human memory by allowing it to leave the private darkness of the skull. Before words could carry a thought from one person to another with any detail, experience was more tightly held inside gesture, imitation, place, and direct watching. Those things still mattered, and they never disappeared. A child could learn by seeing how a hand moved. A group could follow a familiar path without needing a long explanation. Fear could pass through posture, sound, and movement, but spoken language gave human life another layer. It allowed an event that was not happening now to become present in the minds of others. A danger beyond the hill, a place where water had been found, an animal seen earlier, a mistake made yesterday, a plan for tomorrow. All of these could be carried without being directly visible. This is one of the deepest reasons humans change more than other animals. The world no longer had to teach each person only through immediate contact. It could be described. It could be warned about. It could be remembered aloud, near the origin of the human story. This must be treated carefully. We cannot recover the first full conversations. We cannot know the exact first words or the full shape of early speech. Language leaves fewer direct traces than stone tools or bones. But the broad importance of human language is not difficult to see. Humans became able to coordinate attention in a very unusual way. One mind could point another mind towards something absent. That is a quiet revolution. A track on the ground could be shown, but a story about where the animal went could travel farther. A dangerous place could be avoided after someone described it. A useful method could be corrected with sound, not only by repeated demonstration. A memory could become less dependent on one person standing in the right place at the right time. This did not make language perfect. Words can mislead. Memories can change when repeated. Fear can grow larger in telling. Knowledge can become confused. But even with those limits, language made human change more mobile. It allowed experience to move between bodies with less need for direct repetition. A child did not need to discover every danger alone. A group did not need every member to witness the same event. The beginning of human change had already involved tools, fire, learning, and shared attention. Language joined these older patterns and gave them reach. A tool could be named. A place could be remembered by sound. A warning could be passed quickly. A person who was absent could still become part of the group's awareness through what others said. This meant that the human environment was no longer made only of land, weather, animals, and objects. It was also made of meanings. A stone was not only a stone if people knew it as a good stone for cutting. A path was not only a line across ground if it carried a remembered danger. Fire was not only heat if it was surrounded by instruction, caution, and habit. Language helped attach memory to the world. It made places thicker with human understanding. This helps answer why humans change so much. Biological evolution changes bodies slowly, but language can reorganize behavior within a lifetime. It can spread a useful idea, hold a warning, preserve a mistake, or give a group a shared direction. It can make the past useful before the past is physically present again. Still, language did not lift humans outside nature. It grew from breathing bodies, social faces, listening ears, and the need to survive together. It was another outward movement of the human animal. Memory began in nervous tissue, but through speech it could enter the air between people. Once memory could live there, human life became harder to confine to one body, one moment, or one generation. A spoken warning changes the distance between danger and the body. Without language, a creature often learns danger by seeing it, smelling it, hearing it, or suffering from it. With language, danger can arrive before the danger itself. A person can hear about a place not yet reached, an animal not yet seen, a mistake not yet made. This does not mean early speech was perfect or modern in form. It means that sound, shared attention, and memory could begin to work together in a way that gave human groups a wider field of awareness. The body still lived in the present. Feet still touched the ground. Hunger still returned. Cold still entered the skin. But speech allowed the mind to move away from the immediate moment and bring back something useful. A group could prepare for what was absent. That is a powerful shift in the story of why humans changed more than other animals. Language made survival less trapped inside direct experience. It helped people coordinate without every person needing to discover the same thing alone. A young child could learn that a certain fruit was not safe, even before tasting it. A hunter could hear where animals had moved, even before seeing their tracks. A group could remember a dry season, a flooded crossing, a safe shelter, or a conflict with another group, even when the original event was gone. Near the beginning of the human path, this gave memory a new shape. It was no longer only stored in what one person had seen, it could be carried by telling, and once experience could be told, it could be rearranged. It could be compared with another memory, it could be corrected by someone else. It could become part of a shared picture of the world. This is where language becomes more than communication. It becomes a way of building a common reality. A fire is visible to everyone sitting near it, but words can make people think about fuel before the fire dies. A stone tool can be passed from hand to hand, but words can help explain where good stone is found. A path can be walked by the group, but words can keep alive the reason one path is safer than another. In this way, language attached invisible knowledge to visible things. The landscape became richer because it was filled with remembered meanings. A hill might not be just a hill. It might be a place where weather changes, where animals pass, where someone was injured, where water can be seen from a distance. The human animal began to live not only in physical space, but in spoken space. That spoken space could stretch beyond eyesight. It could reach into yesterday and tomorrow. It could connect people who had not stood in the same place at the same time. This does not make humans separate from other animals. Many animals communicate, warn, signal, and learn. But human language appears to have become unusually flexible, able to carry many kinds of information and combine them in open-ended ways. That flexibility mattered because human survival had already become complex. Tools needed methods. Fire needed care. Children needed teaching. Groups needed coordination. Places needed memory. Speech helped hold these threads together. It allowed change to spread with fewer objects and fewer direct demonstrations. A useful idea could move through breath. A warning could cross the space between bodies in a moment. A memory could be kept alive by repetition, even as the original scene disappeared. This also brought risk. Words can preserve fear as well as wisdom. They can confuse, exaggerate, or carry wrong memories forward. Human change was never a pure ladder upward. But language still gave the human animal a new kind of inheritance. What one person lived through could become part of what another person knew. And when that became possible, each life no longer began only with its own senses. It began inside a field of remembered speech. Language did something else that may be even harder to see. It allowed humans to hold together around things that were not physically present. A tool can be touched. A fire can be felt. A path can be walked. But a rule, a promise, a warning about tomorrow, a memory of someone no longer alive, or an idea about what a group should do next, does not sit on the ground like a stone. It needs minds to carry it, and it needs speech to keep it moving. This is where human change became especially unusual. People could begin to coordinate not only around what they saw, but around what they shared in memory and meaning. A group could move because of a place remembered. It could avoid danger because of a story repeated. It could care for children because certain habits had become expected. It could pass on ways of making tools, tending fire, dividing food, and watching the landscape. None of this required writing. Long before writing, speech could already help memory travel. Near the origin of the human story, that mattered because survival was becoming too wide for one body and one moment. Tools needed methods. Fire needed caution. Children needed long teaching. Landscapes needed to be remembered across seasons. Speech helped bind these pieces together. It gave human life a way to continue when the original event had passed. If a person found water during a dry time, the discovery did not have to remain locked inside that person's steps. If a group learned that one food caused sickness, the danger did not have to be learned again by every child. If a certain material made better tools, that preference could become part of group habit. Language did not make memory perfect, but it made memory more shareable. That shareable memory changed the pace of human life. A useful change could move through a group without waiting for every person to repeat the same trial. A warning could shorten suffering. A remembered method could save time. A spoken correction could guide a hand before the mistake was finished. This is one of the deep reasons humans changed more than other animals. The human body still evolved, but human life also began to change through accumulated meaning. The world was no longer only made of cold, hunger, animals, stone, wood, water, and distance. It was also made of what those things had come to mean within a group. A cave might mean shelter. A certain sound might mean caution. A river crossing might mean danger in one season and safety in another. A tool shape might mean a better way to cut. These meanings could live in speech, and because they could live there, they could survive beyond the moment. But there was a cost hidden inside this gift. Once humans depended on shared meaning, they became vulnerable to losing it. A forgotten route, a broken teaching chain, a vanished elder, a scattered group, or a changed landscape could make old knowledge fail. Words could preserve wisdom, but they could also carry confusion. They could make fear travel farther than the original danger. They could attach certainty to things that were only partly understood. Human change was powerful, but it was never clean. It was always mixed with error, loss, and dependence. Still, language gave the human animal something rare. It let one generation place part of its world inside the next generation before that next generation had fully met the world for itself. A child could enter life already surrounded by remembered dangers, named places, repeated habits, and shared expectations. That child would still need a body, food, care, sleep, and warmth. But it would also need the invisible inheritance of speech. From that point forward, human change could no longer be explained only by flesh and bone. It had to include the spoken memory between people, the quiet bridge that allowed the past to keep shaping the living. One of the clearest signs that humans changed in a different way is that the same fragile animal learned to live in many kinds of worlds. Not perfectly, not easily, and not everywhere at once, but widely enough that the pattern becomes hard to ignore. Human groups move through warm grasslands, cold open places, forests, mountains, dry lands, river valleys, coasts, and islands. The body did not suddenly become a different species each time the landscape changed. The skin did not grow thick fur for every cold place. The teeth did not become new tools for every food. The feet did not become hooves, fins, or claws. Instead, the human way of living changed around the same basic body. This is important because it brings us back to the beginning of the human story. A body that was not complete by itself had already learned to borrow from the world: stone, fire, memory, teaching, and group life. When humans entered new environments, that older pattern became even more important. A cold place demanded warmth, shelter, fuel, clothing, and food knowledge. A coast demanded attention to tides, shellfish, fish, weather, and safe movement near water. A dry landscape demanded memory of water, careful travel, and knowledge of plants and animals that could survive there. In each case, the human body remained limited, but the human life around the body could shift. This is one reason humans changed more than other animals. Many animals are tied closely to particular habitats. They may be wonderfully adapted to those habitats, but their survival depends on the match between body and place. Humans became less tied to one match. They could carry habits into new places and then reshape those habits. They could learn from local materials. They could change tools, clothing, shelter, routes, diet, and timing. The landscape did not become easy. It simply became negotiable in more ways. That negotiation was slow and dangerous. Groups could fail, people could starve, freeze, become lost, or meet conditions their knowledge could not answer. Human expansion across the world should not be imagined as a clean march of success. It was made of pauses, losses, returns, and adaptations that depended on place. But the larger pattern remains. Humans became animals whose survival was unusually portable. A remembered skill could travel with a group. A way of making a cutting edge could be used where suitable stone existed. Fire knowledge could matter in cold nights and new foods. Language could help carry warnings across unfamiliar ground. Children could grow into local habits that their bodies were not born knowing. This made human change stretch across space as well as time. Near the origin of each new settlement, the same question returned in a different form. What can this body do here? What can the group remember here? What can be eaten here? What can be carried, shaped, burned, worn, avoided, followed, or taught here? The answers were not identical. That is the point. Human beings did not spread by repeating one single lifestyle everywhere. They spread because their way of life could bend. In one place, survival might lean more heavily on large animals. In another, on plants, fish, shellfish, roots, seeds, or seasonal movement. In one place, shelter might mean caves. In another, built structures from available material. In another, repeated use of protected landforms. The human animal changed because its environment changed, and because its learned behavior could change with it. This is why the title question cannot be answered only by saying humans were intelligent. Intelligence alone is too vague. The more grounded answer is that humans became able to turn different landscapes into different ways of living. The same body met many worlds, and each world taught it another version of being human. To live in a new place, humans did not need only courage or movement. They needed local knowledge. A landscape is never just empty space. It has seasons, hidden dangers, useful materials, difficult paths, animal habits, water sources, weather patterns, and foods that may be safe at one time, but risky at another. A body walking into such a place does not understand it automatically. The eyes can see trees, stones, snow, sand, rivers, or coastlines, but seeing is not the same as knowing. Human survival depended on turning unfamiliar ground into remembered ground. That process could take time, and it could cost lives. A group might learn where water remained after heat. It might learn which winds made travel dangerous, which plants could be eaten, which animals should be followed, and which places were better avoided. This is where human change becomes closely tied to geography. The same species could live differently because different places taught different lessons. Near the beginning of human expansion into new environments, the body still carried old needs: food, warmth, rest, safety, care for children, and protection from injury. But the answers had to be rebuilt from what the local world allowed. Stone from one place might fracture well into cutting edges, while stone from another might be less useful. Wood, bone, shell, fibre, hide, clay, snow, grass, or reeds could matter more or less depending on where people lived. The human animal changed because it learned to treat the landscape as a set of possible answers. A cold place could become more livable through coverings, shelters, fire, and seasonal knowledge. A coast could become more livable through attention to tides, fish, shellfish, boats, much later in some regions, and the timing of movement. A dry place could become more livable through memory, patience, and deep knowledge of scattered resources. This was not magic. It was not instant mastery, it was repeated adjustment. That adjustment helps explain why humans changed more than other animals. Many species adapt beautifully to a habitat through inherited bodies and behaviors. Humans also had inherited biology, but their learned behavior could be tuned to local conditions within generations. A child born in a cold region could grow up knowing cold as part of ordinary life. A child born near the sea could learn the rhythm of shore and tide. A child born in a forest could learn shade, fruiting patterns, animal calls, and paths that outsiders would miss. The body remained human, but attention became local. Memory became local. Skill became local. Over time, this produced many human ways of being, not one simple human way. This matters for the title because changed more does not only mean that humans changed the planet later, it also means humans were changed by every place they entered. They became desert people in some places, coast people in others, ice edge people in others, forest people in others, river people in others. These are not separate species, but different relationships between the same human body and different worlds. Each relationship carried its own habits, tools, timing, risks, and memories. Language helped hold them. Children helped continue them. Tools helped make them practical. Fire helped soften some of the hardest limits. Still, the old fragility never disappeared. If a group lost its local knowledge, the land could become dangerous again. If climate shifted, the old answers might weaken. If a familiar animal moved away or a water source failed, memory had to change or suffering followed. Human flexibility was real, but it was never free. It depended on learning the ground carefully and on passing that learning forward. In this way, the human story widened across the earth not as one single triumph, but as many quiet negotiations with place. Every new environment asked the same fragile animal a different question, and human change grew from the many different answers. Human movement across the earth did not make one human story. It made many. That is easy to forget when we speak about humans as if they were a single kind of animal with one simple way of living. The body was broadly the same, but the worlds around it were not. A person living near ice had to understand cold in the body, in shelter, in clothing, in food, and in travel. A person living near a warm coast had to know water, tides, fish, shellfish, storms, and the changing edge between land and sea. A person living in dry country had to know distance, heat, shade, hidden water, and the patience required by scattered resources. These differences did not erase the shared origin of humanity. They show what made that origin so unusual. From one fragile beginning, human life kept dividing into local answers. The same animal became many kinds of survivor. This is one of the quietest explanations for why humans changed more than other animals. Humans did not only adapt through new body parts, they adapted by becoming different through place, memory, and teaching. A child did not need to be born with a coast in the blood to learn the coast. A child did not need to be born with stone knowledge in the bones to learn which stone could cut. A child did not need to become a new species to inherit the habits of cold nights, long walks, careful gathering, or shared fires. Human childhood made local worlds enter the mind. Human language helped those worlds travel across generations. Human tools made local materials useful. Human groups made difficult places less impossible. But every success also carried dependence. To live in many places, humans had to remember many things. They had to keep the chain of learning intact. A body could move into new land, but without knowledge, land remained dangerous. This is why the spread of humans should not be imagined as a simple conquest of nature. It was more like a long series of fragile agreements. The body asked the land for food, warmth, safety, and direction. The land answered only through signs that had to be learned. If people learned them well enough, life could continue. If they failed, the same place could become harsh again. Near the root of the human story, this pattern reaches back to the first problem. The body alone was not enough. In new environments, that truth became stronger. The farther humans moved, the more they needed what was outside the body. Coverings, tools, roots, shared warnings, remembered seasons, and the patience of older knowledge. The human animal changed because it carried an open way of living into different worlds. Over time, this created variety inside humanity itself. Not all people ate the same foods. Not all people built the same shelters. Not all people used the same materials, followed the same animals, or faced the same risks. The planet did not receive one human answer. It received many human answers, each shaped by a meeting between the same species and a different place. This makes human change both impressive and humbling. Impressive, because few animals have made so many environments livable through learned behavior. Humbling, because every one of those ways of living depended on conditions that could change. Climate could shift. Sea levels could move. Animals could vanish from a region. Plants could fail. A group could lose memory, split apart, or meet a landscape that old habits did not explain. Human flexibility did not remove uncertainty. It only gave uncertainty more possible answers. That may be the most honest way to understand this part of the story. Humans changed more than other animals not because they escaped the limits of nature, but because they learned to meet nature through many layers at once. Body, tool, fire, speech, memory, group, and place. Each new landscape added another layer. Each layer changed what being human could mean. And so the animal that began with a body not strong enough on its own became an animal whose life could take shape in almost any place where knowledge could survive. Farming was not just a new way to get food. It was a new relationship with time, land, labour, and waiting. Before farming became common in different parts of the world, many human groups lived by gathering, hunting, fishing, and moving with seasonal resources. Those ways of life were not simple, and they were not careless. They required deep knowledge of plants, animals, weather, roots, and timing. Farming did not arrive because earlier people knew nothing. It grew slowly, in some regions, from long familiarity with local plants and animals. People who already watched seasons closely began, over time, to influence what grew near them, which plants were favoured, which animals stayed closer, and how food might be made more predictable. This change was not the same everywhere. It did not happen all at once, and it should not be treated as a single invention by one group. But wherever farming became important, it changed human life from the ground upward. The human body still needed the same basic things: energy, sleep, warmth, safety, and care for the young. But the way those needs were met began to depend more heavily on fields, stored food, repeated labour, and staying near particular places. That matters for the larger question of why humans changed more than other animals. Earlier, humans had already learned to carry survival outside the body through tools, fire, language, and shared memory. Farming extended that pattern into the soil itself. A field became more than land. It became stored hope, future food, risk, work, ownership, memory, and anxiety. Seeds placed in the ground did not feed anyone immediately. They asked people to wait. They asked people to return. They asked people to protect a place before it gave back. In this way, farming changed the rhythm of human life. Time became tied more tightly to planting, growth, harvest, storage, and hunger between seasons. Movement did not disappear, and not all farming people lived the same way, but many communities became more settled than before. Staying in one place made some things possible. Stored food could support larger populations in some regions. Children could be born into more permanent villages. Tools, houses, paths, burial places, and shared spaces could accumulate. But staying also brought new pressures: waste, disease, crowding, conflict, crop failure, and dependence on fewer food sources could become more serious. This is why farming should not be described as pure progress or pure disaster. It was a transformation with trade-offs. Near the origin of farming, the old human pattern repeated in a new form. People changed the environment, and then the changed environment began to change people. A planted landscape required attention. A stored harvest required protection. A village required cooperation, memory, and rules. A field could make food more reliable in one sense, but more fragile in another. If the rain failed, if pests came, if soil weakened, if conflict arrived, the same settled life that gave stability could become a trap. Human change deepened because the outside world was no longer only used. It was managed, shaped, waited on, and depended upon. The human animal had begun by borrowing strength from stone and warmth from fire. With farming, it began to borrow the future from the ground. That was a powerful step, but not a simple one. It made humans more capable of building lasting communities, and also more bound to the places and systems they had created. From this point, human change would no longer be only about surviving a landscape. It would increasingly be about living inside landscapes that human hands had already begun to remake. Farming changed the body by changing the day. A person who lives by moving through a landscape follows one kind of pressure. A person who lives beside fields, stored food, animals, houses, and repeated work follows another. The muscles may still walk, lift, dig, carry, grind, cut, and build, but the rhythm of effort becomes more tied to place. Work returns to the same ground again and again. Soil must be prepared, seeds must be protected, plants must be watched. Food must be gathered at the right time, stored, defended, processed, and shared. This did not make all farming lives the same, and it did not remove hunting, gathering, fishing, or movement from human history. But it did create a new kind of pressure around the body. The human animal was no longer only reading a landscape for what it already offered. It was asking the landscape to answer later. That delay changed human life. Hunger and hope became connected to a future harvest. Labor done today might matter months later. Failure could also arrive months later when there was less time to escape it. Near the origin of farming, this was one of the deepest changes. Humans began to live inside a calendar made by plants, animals, weather, and work. The body had always lived in seasons, but farming made seasonality more binding in many places. It tied people to cycles of planting, growth, ripening, storage, and shortage. It also changed what counted as security. A full storehouse could feel like safety, but it also needed protection. A field could promise food, but it could not be picked up and carried away when danger came. A village could hold families, tools, memories, and graves, but it could also make leaving harder. This is why farming belongs so strongly to the question of why humans changed more than other animals. Humans did not simply adapt to the land. They made commitments to the land, and those commitments reshaped them. The hands that once carried tools across changing routes now returned often to the same tasks. The back bent over repeated labor. The teeth met different foods in different ways, depending on local crops and processing. Diets in many farming societies became more dependent on a smaller number of staple foods than the varied diets of many foraging groups, though the details differed greatly by region. This could support larger communities, but it could also bring nutritional stress when variety narrowed or harvests failed. The changed environment also changed disease. People living closer together, closer to waste, and often closer to domesticated animals faced new risks. Not every community experienced this in the same way, and the evidence varies by place, but the broad pattern is clear enough. Settled, dense life created biological pressures different from more mobile life. Human change was no longer only cultural, it became physical, social, and ecological at the same time. The ground people worked began to work back upon them. Larger populations could grow where food production supported them. Larger populations then required more food, more rules, more storage, more labor, and more protection. A loop formed. More farming could support more people, and more people could require more farming. That loop became one of the major engines of later history. It did not begin as a simple plan. It emerged from practical choices, local conditions, and gradual dependence. This is the same old human pattern, now made heavier. The body met a limit, then built an answer outside itself. But once the answer existed, the body had to live inside it. Stone extended the hand. Fire altered food and night. Language carried memory. Farming extended survival into fields and stored grain, but it also placed human life under new kinds of waiting, work, crowding, and risk. That is why farming was not merely a method of eating. It was a new world humans built around themselves and then slowly became bound to. Farming made human change heavier because it created a world that could not easily be put down. A stone tool can be carried, lost, remade, or replaced. Fire can be moved, tended, or started again when conditions allow. Speech can travel with a group. But a field is different. A field asks people to stay near it. It asks for seasons of attention. It asks for boundaries, memory, labor, and return. Once a community depends on planted land and stored food, survival becomes tied to a place in a deeper way. The ground is no longer only where people walk. It becomes something they wait for, worry over, defend, inherit, and sometimes fight about. This is a major step in the story of why humans changed more than other animals. The human animal did not only change tools or meals, it began changing landscapes, and then those landscapes began changing human life back. A planted field can look quiet, but it holds many invisible changes inside it. It changes where people sleep. It changes how far they travel. It changes when they work. It changes how they measure the year. It changes how food is stored, who guards it, who shares it, and who may be left without enough. It can make families and communities larger in some places, because stored food may help support more children and more settled living. But larger communities bring more needs. More mouths require more food. More food requires more land, more labor, more planning, and more protection. In this way, farming can create a loop that is hard to leave. People farm to support a growing community, and the growing community needs farming even more. This does not mean every farming society followed the same path. Human history is too varied for that. Some communities mixed farming with hunting, gathering, fishing, herding, and seasonal movement. Some crops were more reliable than others. Some regions supported settled villages earlier, while others did not. But the broad transformation remains clear. Farming made humans live more strongly inside systems they had made. Near the origin of human change, the body had borrowed strength from stone and warmth from fire. With farming, it began to borrow stability from the future. A seed in the ground was a promise, but not a guarantee. Weather could break it, insects could damage it, soil could weaken, disease could spread through crowded life. Conflict could rise where food and land became worth guarding. So farming gave humans new security and new uncertainty at the same time. This is why it should not be called simply good or bad. It was a trade. It allowed some human groups to build denser communities, longer-lasting settlements, more stored resources, and eventually the conditions from which many later civilizations grew. But it also brought harder work in many settings, narrower diets in some places, more exposure to certain diseases, and new forms of dependence. The human animal changed because it had built a new environment around itself, and that environment carried rules of its own. A village, a field, a storehouse, and a herd do not behave like open wilderness. They demand care, they attract risk, they create obligations that last beyond a single day. This connects directly to the beginning of the human story. Humans changed so much because their survival kept moving outward. First into tools, then into fire, then into speech and memory, and now into land shaped for future food. Each outward movement made life more flexible but also more dependent. Farming shows this pattern with unusual clarity. Humans were not standing above nature. They were entering a tighter bargain with it. They changed plants and animals in certain places, but they were also changed by the labor, diet, settlement, disease, population growth, and social pressure that followed. From this point onward, human history became less about adapting to a landscape as it was found, and more about living inside landscapes that human hands had already begun to make. A city is not only a larger village, it is a different kind of environment. In a village, people may know many of the faces around them, and daily life still touches fields, animals, paths, water, and stored food in direct ways. In a city, the human world grows denser. More bodies live close together. More work becomes divided. More goods move through hands that did not make them. More rules are needed because more strangers share space. Streets, walls, drains, markets, temples, workshops, houses, and storage places begin to shape the day. The human animal is still the same animal underneath. Hungry, tired, social, vulnerable, needing sleep, warmth, safety, food, and care. But the world pressing on that body becomes more artificial, more crowded, and more layered with human choices. This is why cities matter so much in the question of why humans changed more than any other animal. Earlier changes had moved survival outside the body into tools, fire, language, memory, fields, and stored food. Cities gathered many of those changes into one place and made them dense. A city is a landscape made largely from human decisions. It changes where people walk, what they see, whom they meet, what they smell, how they work, what they fear, and what they expect from others. Near the beginning of urban life in different regions, no one needed to understand all the consequences for the change to matter. People could be drawn by food storage, trade, protection, ritual, water management, labor, power, or opportunity. Different early cities grew for different reasons. But once many people lived close together, the conditions of human life shifted again. A person in a city could depend on people they did not know. Someone might eat grain grown by another household, use a pot made by a specialist, walk on a street maintained by shared labor, or follow a rule set by authorities beyond the family. This was a new kind of dependence. The group was no longer only the small circle of people one knew closely. Society became larger than face-to-face memory. That made human change more powerful and also more difficult to escape. In a city, human beings could build things that outlasted them. Walls, canals, roads, shrines, records, and houses could remain after individual bodies were gone. Memory no longer lived only in speech or habit. It began to settle into built space. A child born into such a place did not enter wild ground first. The first world might be a courtyard, a street, a doorway, a storage room, a market sound, a wall, a rule, a routine. The environment teaching the child was already shaped by generations of human work. This connects back to the earliest human pattern. The body was never enough by itself, so humans built answers outside it. But in the city, the outside answer became enormous. It surrounded the body from every direction. It was no longer just a tool in the hand or a fire at night. It was the whole arrangement of life. Cities gave humans new possibilities: exchange, craft, shared labour, protection, administration, art, and long memory. They also created new pressures: crowding, waste, disease, inequality, conflict, and dependence on systems too large for one person to understand. The same change that made human life more organized also made it more fragile in new ways. A city could feed many, but it needed supply. It could protect many, but it could also trap them. It could hold knowledge, but it could also concentrate power. This is the strange weight of urban life. Humans changed the landscape so deeply that the landscape became human-made, and then that human-made landscape began changing humans in return. Cities changed humans by changing what a person could depend on without seeing its source. In a small group, food, danger, care, and work are often close enough to be understood through direct experience. In a city, life becomes more distant from its own foundations. Water may come through a channel someone else maintains. Grain may arrive from fields beyond the walls. Tools may be made by hands the buyer never meets. Rules may come from people far above ordinary daily contact. This distance is important. It means that human survival has moved into systems. The body still needs simple things, but the path to those things becomes longer and more complicated. A person eats, sleeps, works, trades, obeys, argues, waits, and hopes inside arrangements no single body could build alone. This is one of the reasons humans changed more than other animals. They did not only create objects, they created organized worlds that required people to live differently within them. A city teaches the body new habits. It teaches when to wake, where to walk, which places are allowed, which sounds mean trade, prayer, work, danger, or authority. It teaches people to pass strangers without treating every unknown face as an immediate threat. It teaches trust in things that are partly invisible: stored grain, measures, promises, walls, drains, roads, markets, and commands. Near the origin of urban life, this was a deep shift in human experience. The human brain that once learned a landscape of rivers, animals, seasons, and paths now also had to learn a landscape of rules, roles, buildings, and obligations. The environment had become social in a denser way. A street is not just ground, it is a route shaped by agreement. A wall is not just stone, it is protection, power, labour, boundary, and memory. A marketplace is not just noise. It is exchange, need, trust, debt, and desire gathered into one place. These meanings pressed on people every day. Cities also changed time. Farming had already tied many communities to planting and harvest, but cities added another rhythm: schedules of labour, craft, trade, storage, ceremony, building, repair, and administration. Human life became increasingly divided into specialized tasks. Some people worked fields, some shaped clay, some carried goods, some built, some guarded, some recorded, some ruled, some served. The body could spend more of its life repeating one skill, one route, or one obligation. That specialization allowed complexity to grow, but it also made people more dependent on one another. A potter could make excellent vessels but still need grain. A builder could raise walls but still need water. A ruler could command labour but still depend on farmers, carriers, guards, and makers. In this way, the city was like a larger body made of many human bodies, each part doing only part of what survival required. That larger body could achieve things no small group could easily do. It could build, store, defend, organize, and remember on a new scale. But it could also suffer on a new scale. Disease could move through crowded streets. Waste could become dangerous. Inequality could harden. Conflict could spread through many lives. If food supply failed, many people could feel the failure together. This is the old human bargain again, made larger. Every outward extension gives power and dependence at the same time. Tools extended the hand. Fire extended warmth and night. Language extended memory. Farming extended survival into fields. Cities extended human life into systems. And once humans lived inside systems, they were changed by them. The animal that began by needing others now lived in places where even strangers became part of survival. That may be one of the strangest turns in the human story. The body remained ancient, but the world around it became crowded with human-made meanings. Cities made human memory tree heavier. Before cities, memory could live in bodies, speech, paths, tools, fireplaces, burial places, and repeated use of the land. In cities, memory also entered stone, brick, streets, walls, shrines, storage rooms, records, and ruins. A building could hold the labour of people who were gone. A street could guide feet that belonged to children not yet born when the path was first shaped. A wall could continue to divide space long after the hands that built it had disappeared. This changed human life because the past became harder to leave behind. The human animal began to live inside accumulated decisions. A house stood where someone had chosen to build. A market formed where exchange had become regular. A temple or public space could gather meaning across generations. The city became a kind of memory that surrounded the body. Near the beginning of the human story, memory depended heavily on living people. If a route was forgotten, it could vanish from use. If a technique was not taught, it could fade. In cities, some memories became physical enough to press on people every day. A child did not need to be told that a wall existed. The wall was there. A worker did not need to remember every boundary by speech alone. Boundaries could be built into streets, gates, rooms, and fields beyond the settlement. This is one reason humans changed more than other animals. Humans did not only inherit bodies, habits, and words. Increasingly, they inherited environments already shaped by older human choices. That inheritance could help. It could shelter, organize, store, and teach, but it could also limit. A road can make movement easier, and it can also decide where movement is expected to go. A wall can protect, and it can also confine. A storehouse can reduce hunger, and it can also become a center of power. The same structures that preserved human effort also preserved human inequality, dosbegation, and dependence. Cities made this bargain visible. The outside world humans built around themselves did not remain neutral. It guided behavior. It created routines. It asked people to fit into roles. It made some kinds of life easier and others harder. The body that once moved through open landscapes now moved through planned spaces and crowded meanings. This did not erase the older human needs. People still needed sleep, food, water, warmth, family, safety, and rest from pain. But those needs passed through more layers. Food might come through markets and storage. Water might pass through channels, wells, or shared sources. Safety might depend on walls, guards, rules, and rulers. Memory might depend on records, rituals, monuments, and stories attached to places. In this way, the city continued the long, outward movement of human survival. First the hand reached for stone, then the group gathered around fire, then language carried memory, then farming tied people to fields. Then cities turned whole landscapes into organized human environments. Each step made human life more capable and more complicated. That is the key. Human change was not simply a rise from weakness to greatness. It was an increasing thickness around the body. More tools, more rules. More memories, more buildings, more dependence on things no single person could make alone. By the time cities appeared, the human animal was living inside a world largely made from previous human change. And once that happened, change began feeding on itself. Built environments shaped behavior. Behavior shaped institutions. Institutions shaped future building. And children grew up, treating yesterday's inventions as ordinary reality. This is how humans came to change so much. Not by escaping nature, but by making new layers of nature around themselves. then being shaped by those layers in return. Every human change carried a cost, even when the cost was not visible at first. A tool made the hand more powerful, but it also made the hand depend on what it could hold. Fire softened cold and food, but it also created a need for fuel, care, and control. Language carried memory, but it could also carry fear, error, and confusion. Farming brought stored food and settled life in many places, but it also tied people to harvests, labor, and risk. Cities gathered human strength into dense systems, but those systems made people depend on strangers, rules, supplies, and structures they could not fully see. This is the strange pattern behind the whole story. Humans changed more than other animals not because each change was simply better, but because each change opened a new door and closed another one quietly behind it. Near the beginning of the human path, the body was fragile and unfinished in a useful way. It needed more than itself. That need made tools, teaching, memory, fire, and cooperation powerful. But every outward extension also created a new vulnerability. A creature that survives with tools is weaker when tools are gone. A creature that survives by teaching suffers when teaching breaks. A creature that lives in settled systems is exposed when those systems fail. This does not mean change was a mistake. It means change was never free. The human animal did not rise above nature. It entered deeper bargains with nature, one after another. The body gave up certain kinds of directness. It no longer had to answer every problem with tooth, claw, skin, or muscle. Instead, it answered with objects, habits, meanings, and built environments. That made human life extraordinarily flexible. It also made human life more layered and more dependent. A person could be safer inside a house, but now safety depended on walls, materials, fire control, neighbors, and the wider supply of food. A person could eat stored grain, but now hunger depended on weather months earlier, on storage, on pests, on social rules, and on who controlled the food. A person could live among many others in a city, but now disease, waste, conflict, power, and inequality could travel through the same closeness that made exchange possible. Human change often solved one problem by creating a new kind of problem. That is not failure, it is the structure of adaptation. Every solution changes the environment in which the next solution must appear. This is why the question in the title should not be heard as a celebration alone. Humans changed more than any other animal, partly because humans kept building around their own limits. But the more they built, the more they had to live inside what they built. The stone edge, the fire, the spoken warning, the field, the wall, the storehouse, the street. Each one reduced one kind of helplessness while adding another thread of dependence. The origin of human change remains inside all of it. A soft-skinned animal, not especially fast or strong alone, learned to place pieces of survival outside the body. Over time, those pieces became larger, older, and harder to escape. What began as a stone in the hand became a world of tools. What began as shared attention became language, memory, and rules. What began as careful use of plants and animals became fields, villages, and cities. The cost was not always disaster. Sometimes the cost was simply complexity. More things had to work. More knowledge had to be kept. More people had to cooperate. More systems had to hold. And when they did hold, human life could become astonishingly adaptable. When they failed, the same adaptability could reveal how dependent humans had become on the layers they had created. The cost of human change can also be seen in the body itself. The body did not stop being ancient just because human life became surrounded by tools, cooked food, fields, walls, and rules. Bones, muscles, teeth, skin, sleep, hunger, stress, and pain still belonged to a living animal shaped by long natural history. But the world around that animal kept changing faster than the body could be remade. This created a quiet tension. The hand could hold a tool, but the hand was still flesh. The back could carry loads, bend over fields, sit inside houses, or work in repeated ways, but the back was still built from the older structure of an upright animal. The mouth could receive softer cooked foods and processed grains, but teeth and jaws still carried traces of a deeper past. The mind could live inside language, rules, memory, trade, and social pressure, but it still felt fear, loss, uncertainty, and fatigue through an animal nervous system. This is not a medical claim or a simple explanation for modern discomfort. It is a broader historical point. Human change often altered the conditions of life before the body could fully settle into them. Near the beginning of the human story, change was already happening outside the skin. That was its power, but because it happened outside the skin, it could move faster than anatomy. In your skin, a group could change its food habits without waiting for new teeth. It could change shelter without waiting for new skin. It could change labor without waiting for new bones. It could change social life without waiting for a new nervous system. This flexibility helped humans survive many worlds, but it also meant the body often lived inside arrangements it had not been slowly shaped for in every detail. Farming gives a clear example. More settled life and repeated labor changed daily movement. Diets shifted in many regions towards staple crops. Larger communities changed exposure to disease and stress. Cities made social life denser and more organized. None of these changes affected every person in the same way, and none should be reduced to a single story. But together they show the same pattern. Human culture can transform the living environment quickly, while the body remains tied to older biological limits. That gap is one of the hidden costs of becoming such a changeable animal. It made humans adaptable, but not immune to strain. The body could be protected by a roof and still suffer from crowding. It could be fed by stored grain and still face shortage or imbalance. It could be warmed by fire and still depend on fuel. It could live in a city and still need rest, trust, space, and care. This returns us to the question at the center of the video. Humans changed more than other animals because they learned to build around themselves. But building around the body is not the same as replacing the body. The old animal remained inside the new environment. That is why human history often feels like a mixture of brilliance and burden. Every new layer gave the body help, but also asked it to live under new demands. Tools asked for skill. Fire asked for attention. Language asked for memory and social understanding. Farming asked for repeated labor and waiting. Cities asked for cooperation with strangers and dependence on systems. The body carried all of this. It did not become something outside nature. It became a natural body living inside increasingly unnatural conditions of its own making. That may sound harsh, but it is also deeply human. Our ancestors survived because they could stretch life beyond what the body alone could do. The cost was that the body was always being asked to catch up with the world human behavior had created around it. The strange cost of changing everything is that humans became powerful by becoming less self-contained. A bird carries flight in its own body. A turtle carries protection on its back. A wolf carries much of its hunting life in teeth, legs, smell, and pack behavior. Humans carried bodies too, but more and more of human survival came to depend on things that were not born with the body at all. A tool had to be made or found, a fire had to be kept, a child had to be taught, a field had to be planted, a storehouse had to be guarded, a city had to be supplied, a rule had to be remembered. Each layer made life broader, but also less independent. This is one of the most important truths behind the question of why humans changed more than any other animal. We did not simply become stronger. We became connected to more things that could help us, fail us, shape us, and hold us. Near the beginning of the human story, this dependence was already present in small forms. A sharp stone gave the hand a new edge, but without stone knowledge the hand returned to softness. Fire gave warmth and altered food, but without fuel or attention the warmth disappeared. Language carried memory, but without people to repeat it, memory faded. Farming gave food in storage, but without rain, labor, soil, and protection, storage could become empty. Cities gave walls, exchange, craft, and large human order, but without supply and trust, they became fragile. The same pattern repeats again and again. Humans solved a limit by building a support outside the body, and then life began to depend on that support. This is not a reason to reject human change. It is a reason to understand it more honestly. The human story is not a clean ladder from weakness to mastery. It is a long history of trade-offs. Every answer carried another question inside it. If people could live in colder places with fire, clothing, and shelter, they also had to maintain the knowledge and materials that made those things possible. If people could support larger communities with farming, they also had to live with harvest risk, repeated labor, and tighter settlement. If people could build cities, they also had to live with crowding, hierarchy, disease, waste, and dependence on systems larger than any single person. Human change made the world more usable, but it also made the human animal more entangled. That entanglement reaches back to our earliest condition. The body was not enough by itself, so humans built layers around it. Those layers became tools, habits, teachings, places, foods, shelters, customs, and eventually institutions. Over time, the layers grew so thick that later humans were born into them as if they were natural. A child born near fields does not first meet wild land as an untouched beginning. A child born in a city does not first meet the world as open ground. The child meets human-made paths, walls, rooms, rules, food systems, voices, tools, and expectations. The environment has already been changed before the child arrives. And because the environment has changed, the child is changed by it in return. This is the quiet loop at the center of human history. We change the world in order to survive, and then the changed world becomes the place that teaches us what survival means. That loop made humans more adaptable than any one body could have been. It also made us vulnerable to losing the very systems we depend on. The animal that changed more than any other animal did not leave fragility behind. It carried fragility into larger and larger structures. And perhaps that is why human history feels so unusual. Our greatest strength was never pure strength, but the ability to build around weakness until weakness itself became the beginning of transformation. By the end of this long path, the human animal had become something very unusual, a creature that made parts of its own environment, not all at once, and never with complete control, but steadily enough to change the shape of life. A tool made the hand more than a hand. Wood fire made a small circle of night different from the darkness around it. Language made memory move between bodies. Farming made soil carry future hunger and future hope. Cities made walls, streets, rules, and strangers into parts of daily survival. Each step followed the same old pattern. The body met a limit, and human life built around that limit. This is why humans changed more than any other animal. We did not change only by becoming physically different. We changed by surrounding the same vulnerable body with new layers of behavior, material, memory, and meaning. Near the beginning, that body was not an obvious master of nature. It was exposed, social, dependent, and slow to mature. Yet those traits became openings. Because the body needed care, social life mattered. Because the hand was precise but soft, tools mattered. Because the skin was exposed, fire and shelter mattered. Because childhood was long, teaching mattered. Because memory could be shared, language mattered. Because landscapes were different, local knowledge mattered. Because food was uncertain, farming eventually mattered. Because settlements grew, cities mattered. None of these layers erased the animal underneath. They gave that animal a larger world to live through. That is the central turn in the story. Humans became their own environment not by escaping nature, but by adding human-made conditions to natural ones. A person no longer faced only weather, hunger, animals, cold, and distance. A person also faced tools, customs, fields, buildings, rules, work, shared memory, and inherited expectations. These things became as real in daily life as rivers or seasons. A child born into them could not easily separate what came from nature and what came from human history. Bread, firelight, a doorway, a path, a name, a rule, a village, a market, a family habit. Each one looked ordinary because it was already there, but each one carried a long history of change. This is also why the human story should be told carefully. It is tempting to say humans conquered the world, but that phrase is too simple. Humans were changed by every world they entered. Cold changed them, heat changed them, coastlines changed them, forests changed them, grasslands changed them, rivers changed them, fields changed them, cities changed them. The human animal did not stand outside these forces. It answered them, and then lived inside the answers. Some answers helped greatly, some brought pain, many did both. That is why the story is not only about power. It is about dependence, memory, and return. We built outward because we were limited. We became flexible because we were not complete alone. We changed the world because the world kept pressing against the body, asking for another answer. And once those answers existed, they became the new world pressing on the next generation. The animal that changed more than any other animal may be the animal that made change itself into a habitat. To understand human change honestly, we have to hold two ideas at the same time. Humans are animals, and humans are also animals who learn to surround themselves with things animals do not usually build. There is no need to turn this into a myth of greatness. The human body still belongs to biology. It still needs breath, water, sleep, food, care, warmth, and safety. It still becomes tired. It still feels fear. It still depends on other people at the beginning and often again near the end of life. But around that body, humans built layer after layer of support. A tool is a layer. A fire is a layer. A spoken memory is a layer. A field is a layer. A house, a road, a city, a law, a stored seed, a shared calendar, a name for a place. All of these are layers. They do not replace the body. They change what the body has to face. This is why humans changed more than any other animal in a way that is not only physical, we changed the conditions that shaped us. A creature living in open cold faces one set of pressures. A creature living near fire, shelter, clothing, and shared food faces another. A creature wandering through seasonal resources faces one rhythm. A creature waiting on fields and storage faces another. A creature living among a small circle of known faces faces one social world. A creature living among strangers, rules, trade, and walls faces another. In every case, the body remains ancient, but the environment around the body becomes increasingly human-made. That is the quiet educational value of this story. It reminds us that human nature is not found only inside the skull or inside the bones. It is also found in the spaces we create, the habits we inherit, and the systems we take for granted. Near the beginning of human life, survival depended on watching the world closely. Later, it depended on watching the world and also watching the human-made world that had grown around it. A child had to learn not only fire, food, faces, and danger, but also customs, paths, tools, work, speech, and expectations. The human mind became shaped by both landscape and culture, by both weather and memory, by both hunger and meaning. This makes the human animal powerful, but it also makes the human animal responsible in a quiet way. If we build environments that shape us, then what we build matters. The tools we use shape attention. The foods we depend on shape daily life. The places we live shape movement, rest, and closeness. The stories we repeat shape what later people notice and fear. This does not mean every human problem can be solved by simply choosing better habits. History is too large and unequal for that. Many people inherit conditions they did not make. But the deeper lesson remains. Humans are not only shaped by nature as it was given. Humans are shaped by nature after human hands have altered it. That is why the story cannot end with pride alone. It should end with humility. The same ability that made humans adaptable also made us dependent on fragile layers of knowledge, cooperation, and care. If those layers are neglected, the old vulnerability returns. If they are protected wisely, they can hold life across generations. The human animal changed more than any other animal because it kept turning limits into surroundings and surroundings into inheritance. We became the creature that lives inside its own answers. And perhaps the most important question is not only how that happened, but what kind of world our answers are still making around us. So the answer is not that humans changed more because we were outside nature. The answer is almost the opposite. Humans changed more because we were deeply inside nature, vulnerable to it, dependent on it, and unfinished without help. The wind, the cold, the dark, the hunger, the dangerous animal, the empty season, the crying child, the broken tool, the lost path. These were not small details around the human story. They were the pressure that shaped it. Again and again the human body met a limit. Again and again the answer was built partly outside the body. A stone edge widened the hand. Fire softened night and food. Speech carried memory beyond one skull. Teaching stretched one lifetime into the next. Farming placed hope into the ground. Cities turned human choices into walls, streets, rules, and systems. Each answer made life larger. Each answer also made life more dependent on what had been built. That is the quiet truth behind human change. It was never only progress, and it was never only loss. It was a long chain of bargains. We gained shelter, but needed shelter. We gained tools, but needed knowledge. We gained food stores, but needed harvests and protection. We gained cities, but needed systems to hold. The animal at the center of it all remained soft, social, tired, hungry, and mortal. Yet around that animal grew a world of memory. This is the value of looking back. It does not tell us that humans are above other animals. It tells us that humans are animals whose lives became layered with the work of those who came before. Every ordinary thing around us carries that history in a quiet way. Cooked food, a doorway, a path, a word, a tool, a shared habit, a place where people gather. None of these things is outside the human story. They are the human story continuing in physical form. Near the beginning, our ancestors did not know where all this would lead. They did not need to know. They only needed to survive the next cold night, teach the child, remember the place, tend the flame, shape the stone, and stay close enough for knowledge to pass on. From such small acts, the largest human changes slowly grew. And if there is a final lesson here, it is a humble one. What humans build does not simply serve us. It shapes us. The environments we create become the environments our children inherit. The habits we repeat become the ground of someone else's normal life. The systems we depend on can protect life or make it more fragile. That has been true since the first tools and fires, and it remains true now. Humans changed more than any other animal because we became creatures of inherited surroundings. We live not only in forests, deserts, coasts, fields, and cities, but in remembered answers. Some answers are wise, some are costly, many are both. And as long as humans continue to shape the world around the body, the old question remains open. When an animal begins to live inside its own creations, does it ever stop changing?